Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. This morning we'll continue our reading and discussion of this marvelous Protestant work by John Dowling entitled The History of Romanism, the History of the Roman Catholic Church, the History of Popery, the History of the Antichrist of the Bible. And John Dowling is proving beyond any doubt whatsoever that the Roman Catholic Church is indeed the synagogue of Satan, the great falling away. It's all powerful today, just as it was in its height of its glory back in the first millennium. And we're showing the pagan roots of Roman Catholicism. We've already discussed many of them. Yesterday we concluded a discussion about the Roman Catholic adoration of images and idols. That is, worshiping the dead and statues and images of dead saints and one thing and another. All of it is specifically forbidden in the Bible. And what we find in the Roman Catholic Church is the counterfeit Christianity. And it's a poor counterfeit at best if one knows and understands the Scriptures. And it comes to the point where we begin to comprehend that the Roman Catholic Church is so contrary to biblical Christianity as to boast about it, to positively identify itself shamelessly as the great falling away. And what is most obvious to me is that through exposing for all the world to see how contrary the Roman Catholic Church is to the true biblical Christianity, that God is simply making it impossible for us to be deceived by the Roman Catholic Church. And yet, here we are in the 21st century, now calling Roman Catholicism Christianity. And you just have to try to wrap your brain around how we could be so deceived today. I highly recommend that everybody read this book for themselves. John Dowling's The History of Romanism, and see for yourself if God has not made Roman Catholicism so conspicuous in the world as a false system of religion as to be absurd to suggest anything otherwise. It proves my thesis that I've said for so many years now. Why would the Bible be so specific about the very acts, the very words, the very purpose of Christ, who came and died for the souls of sinners, to proclaim himself the Messiah, the one in whose name we are redeemed and reconciled to God, and then leave us clueless about who the Antichrist is? So much to say as to play fast and loose with the blood of the saints, for whom his own Son bled and died to redeem. The Christian world today believes that the Antichrist is either a figment of the long-distant past done away with, or the Antichrist is some single individual off in the distant future just before Christ returns, and the entire Christian era for nearly 2,000 years now has been clueless as to who the Antichrist is, when in fact it has been known all along by true Bible-believing Christians that the Antichrist is, was, and always will be the papacy. And no book that I've ever read proves it more perfectly than this particular book. Every book that I've read here on Inquisition Update just stacks mound upon mound of irrefutable evidence to prove the undeniable conclusion that the papacy is the man of sin, the son of perdition, that great wicked that Paul predicted, that came about as a part and parcel of the great falling away. When people began to depart from the gospel, this in itself gave rise to the papacy. And I don't think there's a book available that is more evident than this book at proving the papacy to be what it is. And one of the things that marks the Roman Catholic Church is its veneration and worship of the dead through images and idols, even so much so that even the heathen of the ancient Roman world would have reviled the Roman Catholic Church for its rank idolatry. The author has proven this. And yet, Christianity today believes that Roman Catholicism is a Christian church, is a Christian form of religion. And many are putting action to those words and reconciling with the Roman Catholic Church and accepting its teachings and the authority of the papacy and the whole lot. The whole world's deceived. And we need to repent of our error. So the worship of images and idols is one of the great defining characteristics of that counterfeit that has deceived the whole world, Roman Catholicism. Now, we'll continue. He says, what opinion then can we have of the present practice of the Church of Rome, but that by a change only of name they have found means to retain the thing? That is idolatry, to retain idolatry. They've changed the word idolatry into the worship of the saints. Communion with the saints, they call it in official Roman Catholic dogma and teaching. The phrase communion with the saints literally means bowing down and praying to images and idols that they say represent the saints. Mary, Joseph, Jesus, Paul, Peter, all the apostles, and all the saints after them. They make and fashion with their own hands images and idols and call them by name, a name of one of the saints, and they bow down and worship and pray to these images. Now, by whatever name you call it, it's idolatry. It's forbidden in God's house. But it's standard practice in every Roman Catholic church, and even more so in the Protestant and evangelical churches as time goes by. More and more imagery and idolatry. They're taking on the very image of Rome. And that's what the whole ecumenical movement is all about. What opinion, then, can we have of the present practice of the Church of Rome, but that by a change only of name they have found means to retain the thing, idolatry, and by substituting their saints in the place of the old demigods, have but set up idols of their own instead of those of their forefathers. What the author is plainly telling you is that rather than to destroy all the images and the idols that were that were worshipped in the pagan realm, in the pagan age, images and idols of demigods like Zeus and Virgo and all the pagan gods of the ancient world, rather than to destroy them, they just dusted them off, put them in a Christian church, a Roman Catholic church called Christian, and gave them names of biblical saints. They used the very same images, the very same idols that were dedicated to the worship of ancient pagan deities, and they simply baptized them, put on quote-unquote Christian clothes on these images and idols, and now name them after the saints of the Bible. And they've taken heathen temples that were built and dedicated to worship these ancient pagan demigods and made them into Roman Catholic churches. The Pantheon is a perfect example of this. The Pantheon was an ancient building in Rome, not far from the Vatican, dedicated to the worship of any and every god. And under the rotunda of that diabolical institution are inset within the walls the images of all the pagan gods of the ancient world. They've taken the same building, the same images and idols, and dedicated them to the worship of Christian saints. That's what is forbidden. This is mixing the holy with the profane, mixing the name of Christ with the worship of images and idols. In other words, it's the same as reducing the incorruptible God into an image made like unto corruptible man and birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things, making the God of creation no different than any of the other pagan deities ever worshipped in the heathen world. It's a corruption of his body. It's a corruption of our concept of who he is. And he's not going to tolerate it. He didn't allow the Israelites to do it. He didn't allow the house of Judah to do it. And he's not going to allow us to do it. Not without bitter punishment. And so to have anything whatsoever to do with this idolatrous and blasphemous Church of Rome is an indictment. It is to provoke God to wrath. And that wrath is soon to descend if it isn't already on its way. The results of this ecumenical movement post-Vatican Council II has its consequences. And we need to be aware of it beforehand and repent of it and try to win as many as possible away from Rome. He continues, he says, in which it is hard to say whether their assurance or their address is more to be admired, who have the face to make that the principal part of the Christian worship, to make idolatry of ancient demigods the principal part of Christian worship, which the first Christians looked upon as the most criminal part of paganism, and have found means to extract gain and great revenues out of a practice which in primitive times would have cost a man both his life and his estate. There was a time in the early history of Rome when if you were caught bowing down and worshiping an image or an idol, your life would have been taken, and so would your whole estate confiscated. But now, in the Roman Catholic Church, it's believed to be true Christianity. The bowing down and worshiping of images and idols. And not only that, but it's a tremendous cash cow for the Roman Catholic Church. Were it not for its idolatries, Rome's income would shrivel up. Were it not for the idolatry of the Roman Catholic Church, pilgrimages, going to so-called holy places, bowing down and making offerings to pagan, man-made images and idols, Rome would suffer loss, financial loss, great financial loss. He says, but our notion of the idolatry of modern Rome will be much heightened still and confirmed as often as we follow them into their temples and to those very altars which were built originally by their heathen ancestors, the old Romans, to honor of their pagan deities, where we shall hardly see any other alteration than the shrine of some old hero filled by the meaner statue of some modern saint. Okay? Your understanding improves vastly when you comprehend that they've taken the very images and idols that were worshipped in the old pagan Roman Empire and simply dusted them off, baptized them, put Christian clothes on them, and give them saintly names. Nothing has changed but the names. There is no way to make paganism, there's no way to make imagery and idolatry holy as a valid worship of the all-holy God. But Rome has made a science of it, mixing the holy with the profane, profaning the name of the Creator by mixing him with man-made gods. The Gentiles haven't learned a thing from the idolatry of the Jews. They can't read the Bible without seeing God repeatedly punishing the Israelites and the house of Judah for their idolatries. And we understand God will not defend those who bow down and make and worship images and idols. It's forbidden in the second commandment. God has consistently punished those who think that worshiping images and idols is somehow a valid way to give honor and glory to Him. And yet the Gentile world, which calls itself Christianity, hasn't learned a thing from that example. If we had, everyone would unanimously condemn the Roman Catholic Church as the synagogue of Satan, because it makes its the centerpiece of her table, the centerpiece of her altar, imagery and idolatry. That which is expressly forbidden in the Scriptures, and that for which the Scriptures are plain in God's hatred of it. He says, nay, they have not always, as I am well informed, given themselves to the trouble of making even this change, but have been content sometimes to take up with the old image just as they found it, after baptizing it only, as it were, or consecrating it anew by the imposition of a Christian name. They simply took the old images and idols right out of the pagan temples, dusted them off, put Christian clothes on them, baptized them, sprinkled their Roman Catholic holy water on them, and call them Mary and Joseph and Jesus. They wear crucifixes around their necks with the emaciated, dead Jesus. They call it Jesus, and they clutch it whenever they're in need of some help of some kind. All of this is forbidden in the Bible. Who would dare, who has eyes to see and ears to hear, call this anything but paganism? He says, nay, they have not always, as I am well informed, given themselves to the trouble of making even this change, but have been content sometimes to take up with the old image just as they found it, after baptizing it only, as it were, or consecrating it anew by the imposition of a Christian name. This their antiquaries do not scruple to put strangers in mind of in showing in their churches. And it was, I think, in that of St. Agnes where they showed me an antique of a young Bacchus, one of the ancient pagan gods, Bacchus, which with a new name and a little change of drapery, that is clothing, stands now worshipped under the title of a female saint in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, I can't give you the perfect example of it. I can't show you a picture of it, but this is what is related by this scholar who has traveled to Rome and now has seen this image that was originally dedicated to the worship of the ancient pagan god Bacchus, which is now draped with female clothes and stands probably in the Vatican or one of the churches of Rome. Dedicated in the name of a female saint. All right, imagery and idolatry. We've handled that. We're going to continue piece by piece to prove that the Roman Catholic Church is just baptized paganism. That's all it is. Number 7, the gods of the pantheon turned into popish saints. Here's the example that I gave earlier, but this is from the reading, so you can take it from the authority given to it. He says, the noblest heathen temple now remaining in the world is the Pantheon, or Rotunda, which, as the inscription over the portico informs us, having been impiously dedicated of old by Agrippa to Jove and all the gods, was impiously reconsecrated by Pope Boniface IV about the year AD 610 to the Blessed Virgin and all the saints. Okay? So the Pope just splattered his holy water on the ancient pagan pantheon and dedicated it in the name of the Blessed Virgin Mary and all the saints. In other words, he just Christianized it. The Pope is so magic that he can turn paganism into true Christianity. And the whole world buys this malarkey. Okay, the Pantheon should have been destroyed early in the Christian era. But it still remains today. And it's one of the principal churches in Rome dedicated to Roman Catholicism. It's a Roman Catholic church. Nothing has changed either inside or outside that church. Nothing has changed but the names of the images and the idols inside that were originally dedicated to the ancient pagan gods and goddesses are now, by the stroke of holy water, by the hand of a pope, simply dedicated into the names of Christian saints. There's no better demonstration of the paganism of Roman Catholicism than that which I've just given, which the author has just given you. It is undeniable proof. It is an admission by the Roman Catholic Church that it's nothing but baptized paganism. And who would dare? Who of any of us who love Jesus would dare to call the Roman Catholic Church a Christian church without choking on the words? It was in 610 AD when the Pantheon, which was built by the Roman king Agrippa, was built to and dedicated for the worship of all the pagan deities. In 610 AD, Antichrist Pope Boniface VIII, or rather Boniface IV, dedicated that same Pantheon and all of its pagan images and idols, dedicated it to the worship of the Blessed Virgin and all the saints. He just baptized the capital of paganism. And just by the stroke of his hand, made it a Christian church. With all of its pagan imagery, with all of its pagan idolatry, only the names were changed. That's the classic Roman Catholicism. Now, speaking of this pantheon, he says, with this single alteration, it serves as exactly for all the purposes of the popish as it did for the pagan worship for which it was built. For as in the old temple, everyone might find the God of his country and address himself to the deity whose religion he was most devoted to. So it is the same thing now. Everyone chooses the patron whom he likes best, and one may see here different services going on at the same time at different altars with distinct congregations around them, just as the inclinations of the people learned them to worship of this or that particular saint. So now, Roman Catholics, people of all religions, can go to the pantheon and surround them, join themselves around whichever particular saint or deity you wish to worship and venerate, and you're in good company no matter where you go. Is this not just a token of the ecumenical movement as came out of Vatican Council II in the 1960s? That's what it is. I don't think anyone has a proper understanding of the ecumenical movement unless they understand it in the context, the historical context, that the Roman Catholic Church demonstrates right here. Takes the rotunda, the pantheon, all of its paganism, and dedicates it to Christian worship. That's the unification of all the pagan deities of the world, together with the Pope, together with Jesus, together with Mary and all the saints. And anybody and everybody can worship in peace and unity and harmony right there in the pantheon. That's what the ecumenical movement is. Again, I say, you don't have an understanding of what came out of Vatican Council II unless you understand it in this context. This historical context. Now he says, and what better title can the new demigods show to the adoration now paid to them than the old ones whose shrines they have usurped? Or how comes it to be less criminal to worship images erected by the Pope than those which King Agrippa or that which Nebuchadnezzar set up? If there be any real difference, most people will, I dare say, be apt to determine in favor of the old possessors. For those heroes of antiquity were raised up into gods and received divine honors for some signal benefits of which they had been the authors to mankind, as the invention of arts and sciences or of some highly useful or necessary purpose of life, whereas the Romish saints, it is certain that many of them were never even heard of, but in their own legends or fabulous histories, and many more, instead of services done to mankind, owe all the honors now paid to them to their vices or their errors, whose merit, like that of Demetrius, as recorded in Acts chapter 19, verse 23, was their skill of raising rebellions in defense of an idol, or throwing kingdoms into convulsions for the sake of some gainful imposture. And as it is in the Pantheon, it is just the same in all other heathen temples that still remain in Rome. They have only pulled down one idol to set up another, and changed rather the names of that object of their worship. Thus the little temple of Vesta, near the Tiber, mentioned by Horace, is now possessed by Madonna of the sun. That of Fortuna Virilis by Mary the Egyptian. That of Saturn, where the public treasure was anciently kept, by St. Adrian. That of Romulus and Remus in the Via Sacra, by two other brothers, Cosmas and Damianus. That of Antonius Pius by Lawrence the Saint. But for my part, adds the historian Dr. Middleton, I should sooner be tempted to prostrate myself before the statue of Romulus or an Antonine than that of a Lawrence or Damian, and give divine honors rather with pagan Rome to the founders of empires than with popish Rome to the founders of monasteries. Now, obviously, Dr. Middleton is being sarcastic, but he makes a very valid point. The gods, the demigods, the man-made images and idols that were celebrated represented pagans who contributed to society in some way or another, and that's why they were deified. But to bow down and worship images and idols of Rome, who haven't created or benefited the world in any way. It's irony. Dr. Middleton uses this irony to prove just how blasphemous it is to call the Roman Catholic Church a Christian religion. He says, in reply to those observations of Dr. Middleton, some may inquire whether there's anything wrong in the change of a heathen temple to a Christian place of worship, any more than in the change of theaters into churches, which is frequently done in the present day. To this objection we answer that it is not to the change of the Pantheon into a Christian temple we object, but to the adoption of the pagan ceremonies into Christian worship, and the adorning of the same images of heathen deities under the names of Christian saints. In other words, it was not so wrong that they took the ancient pagan pantheon and made it into a Christian church, but that they also adopted all of the ancient pagan ceremonies and the ancient pagan worship and call it Christianity. There's no sin in a building, but there is sin in mixing the holy with the profane, and that's what Rome is champion at doing. Now, number 8, another Christianization of paganism. Road gods and saints, and you're seeing an increase of this even in the United States today. Chapels built along the roads. It's just another mark of the Antichrist in this country. Road gods and saints, if my voice will hold out, I'll continue. He says, but their temples are not only places where we see the proofs and overt acts of their superstition. The whole face of the country has the visible characters of paganism upon it, and forever we look about us, we cannot find, as Paul did in Athens as recorded in Acts chapter 17, verse 17, clear evidence of its being possessed by a superstitious and idolatrous people. The old Romans, we know, had their gods who presided peculiarly over the roads, the streets, and the highways, called vialas, semitalas, and capitalas. Okay? These little temples or altars are decked with flowers, or whose statues at least, coarsely carved of wood or stone, were placed at convenient distances in the public ways for the benefit of the traveler who used to step aside to pay their devotions to those rural shrines and beg a prosperous journey and safety in their travels. Okay, so all over the Roman Catholic world, you see springing up all over little Roman Catholic chapels. Some of them no bigger than a doghouse. Some of them no bigger than a dollhouse. Some of them no bigger than a children's playhouse. Okay? Just little structures, portable sometimes, parked alongside the road. And if you open the little doors and you duck to go inside, you can crawl on your knees forward into this little shrine on your knees, obviously, after having taken off your hat, you can waddle to the front of this little chapel and say your prayers and light a candle for an image of one of the saints that are housed within. This is typical all over the Roman Catholic world. Some of these patron saints were dedicated for the protection of certain roads or streets or highways. And if you wanted a safe journey, you were going to travel on a certain highway across Europe, you could stop at a little chapel dedicated to a saint who was the patron saint of this particular highway that you were on. And if you went in and lit a candle or left an offering in the plate, you would be guaranteed protection on your journey on that particular highway. So if you had some very serious business, you weren't just out on a drunken lark and you wanted to make your destination and you wanted to be safe in your travels, then you would stop at this little chapel at the beginning of your trip, clink your coins into the coffer, cross yourself several times, say a ridiculous canned prayer, might even be printed on a card in there so you could just pray it verbatim, light a candle, cross yourself again and kneel a couple of times, genuflect they call it, and then after having satisfied yourself that you paid enough obeisance to this man-made image of wood, stone, or gold or silver, you could back out of the chapel on your knees, get back on your horse or in your car, and just go roaring down the street knowing that you're going to be protected, that you're going to make your destination. This is just rank paganism. And it's common in the Roman Catholic world. South America, Central America, Italy, Spain, Portugal. Anywhere you go in the Roman Catholic world, these are typical. It's straight out of paganism. This is a tradition that Rome just simply baptized and called Christianity. These little temples or altars are decked with flowers, or whose statues, at least coarsely carved of wood or stone, were placed at convenient distances in the public ways, that is, the public highways, for the benefit of travelers who used to step aside to pay their devotions to those rural shrines and beg a prosperous journey and safety in their travels. Now, you're going to see more and more of this in the United States. Right now, it takes the form, in most places, of simply a cross. You might find it in the ditch or just over the fence beside the highway into the farmer's field, but a cross, a white cross hammered into the ground with possibly a little statue of Mary and then a whole bunch of bouquets of flowers all around. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And first thing you know, we're going to be taking on the very image of what is normal in Roman Catholic Europe. Little chapels are going to start to be built where you can stop and pay obeisance to a man-made image or idol. This should be an outrage in a Protestant country. There should be protest all over the place, denunciation of this sort of thing. But you don't find it. That's called religious persecution in a country that champions itself on religious liberty. No one has the courage to stand up for the biblical, historical, and prophetic truth. No one has the courage to stand up for Protestantism. No one has the courage to stand up for true Christian faith. And so our country is going to take on the spitting image of her whorish Romish mother, just as Washington, D.C. has done. They fashioned all the buildings in Washington, D.C. to be the very image of some of these pagan temples in Rome, and few are anxious to make the parallel and to understand what our government is trying to tell us by fashioning their buildings after ancient pagan temples. Religious liberty was not freedom to worship the God of gods, the God of the Bible. Religious liberty was preserved in this country so that every pagan would have his day, including the greatest pagan religion on the planet, Roman Catholicism, where every god is worshipped. It's not just Christianity. It's called Christianity, but it is the worship of every pagan god of history. That's what Roman Catholicism is. They boast this in all their images and idols. They're telling us a tale. They're telling us the truth with their imagery and idolatry. They worship every god except the God of the Bible. He said, now this custom prevails still so generally in all popish countries, but especially in Italy, that one can see no other difference between the old and the present superstition than that of changing the name of the deity or christening as it were the old Hecate in Triviae by the new name of Maria in Trivio, by which title I have observed one of their churches dedicated in this city, and as the heathens used to paint over the ordinary statues of their gods with red or some other gay color, so I have often observed the coarse images of those saints so daubed over with the gaudy red as to resemble exactly the description of the god Pan in Virgil's Eclogue 10. In passing along the road, it is common to see travelers on their knees before these rustic altars, which none ever presume to approach without some act of reverence. You can just see them genuflecting and crossing themselves or taking off their hat. No one can pass these idiotic pagan rustic altars along the roads without demonstrating their reverence by either crossing themselves or genuflecting or taking off their hats or bowing and curtsying or whatever. And it says, and those who are most in haste or at a distance are sure to at least pull off their hats in token of respect. And I took notice that our postilion used to look back upon us to see how we behave on such occasions, and seemed surprised at our passing so negligently before places esteemed so sacred. In other words, the one who accompanied them on their journey, a local who was taking them along on their journey, took special notice to see whether those who were following him were doing the same thing, genuflecting, bending their knees, and taking off their hats, and paying due respect to these pagan chapels along the road. It's enforced in Roman Catholic countries. If you get caught passing one of these chapels or one of these altars along the road dedicated to the worship of the saints, you might suffer violence because you've paid no respect to the God of Rome, the pantheon of gods, and all while they blaspheme the name of God the Creator. Persecuted for not bowing the knee to pagan images and idols, that which we are forbidden of the Scriptures to do. In a Roman Catholic country, you suffer violence if you do not bow down to the images and idols. Number 9, the Pope and the Pontifex Maximus and kissing the Pope's toe. All of this is straight out of paganism. You've heard the Pope called Pontifex Maximus. There's nothing Christian about it. It's from ancient paganism. It is owned by ancient paganism. Nothing of its equivalent was ever found in the Christian religion. The Pope and the Pontifex Maximus and kissing the Pope's toe. In their very priesthood, they have contrived to keep us as near a resemblance as they could to that of pagan Rome, And the sovereign pontiff, instead of deriving his succession from Peter, who, if he would ever been at Rome, did not reside there, at least in any worldly pomp or splendor, may with more reason and much better please style himself the successor of the Pontifex Maximus, or chief priest of old Rome. Okay? So the original use of the term Pontifex Maximus was given to the chief priest of old Rome, that is, pagan Rome. Okay, the very title of all the popes, when you see their insignias on documents, or whether you see their inscription on monuments or statues or images, or even on the gable end of their government offices, of buildings and all, you'll see the term Pontifex Maximus. That term is used and claimed by every pope. Pontifex Maximus. Well, it originated, and it was given originally to the chief priest of old pagan Rome. So anytime you see the papacy represented as Pontifex Maximus, it's an open and undeniable claim of this ancient pagan status. Pontifex Maximus. It's as if to say the papacy openly declares himself to be Antichrist every time he uses this pagan term to describe himself, Pontifex Maximus. Chief Pontiff. You hear the Pope referred to all the time as the Pontiff. That's just short for Pontifex Maximus. The same title given to the chief priest of the pagan Rome. And he says, the Pontifex Maximus, or chief priest of old Rome, whose authority and dignity was the greatest in the Republic, and who was looked upon as the arbiter or judge of all things civil as well as sacred, that is, civil meaning state, and sacred meaning church. In other words, he was the authority of the church and of the nation. He was the union of church and state. Okay, he was the chief arbiter and judge, human as well as divine. The God-man, Pontifex Maximus. The same title borne by all the popes today, Pontifex Maximus. Human as well as divine. And every time you see that term used to describe the papacy, it's just screaming Antichrist. You see, God didn't play fast and loose with the souls for whom his Son bled and died. Anyone who's known anything about the truth for all throughout the Christian era knew precisely who the Antichrist is, was, and always will be the Pope of Rome.